At 73 years old, there is one thing I can say with absolute certainty. The most dangerous lie of your life doesn't look like a lie. It looks like responsibility. For 52 years, I believed I was doing everything right. I built a career, status, security. I was disciplined, respected, reliable. And without realizing it, I was giving my life away in installments. There is a silent promise almost every adult accepts without questioning. Work hard now, live later. It sounds logical, mature, necessary. But what happens when later never arrives? What happens when you achieve everything and discover something essential has been slipping away? I didn't see it at 30, not at 40, not even when I seemed to be at my peak. I only saw it when my body forced me to stop. And there, staring at a hospital ceiling, one question shattered 52 years of certainty. If this ends today, when did I actually live? How many decisions are you making right now based on the assumption that you'll have time later? How many conversations are you postponing? How many dreams are parked on the side? How many times have you said next year? How did this lie begin? Why does it sound so wise? And how does it steal your identity without you noticing? Before we understand how I woke up at 52, we need to go back to the moment I learned to prioritize security over living. Because no one is born believing this lie. We're trained into it.
I wasn't born believing the lie. I was trained into it. I grew up in a small house with a father who measured love in provision and a mother who measured safety in stability. We weren't poor, but we were always one unexpected expense away from panic. I remember overhearing late-night whispers about bills. I remember the word responsibility being spoken like a sacred commandment. So I learned early, security first, feelings later. By the time I was 21, I had a plan. Get the degree, get the job, get ahead. I watched men who laughed too much and dreamed too loudly struggle. I watched disciplined men get promoted, so I chose discipline. At 30, I was proud. Long hours didn't scare me, they validated me. If I was exhausted, it meant I was winning. When my friends took spontaneous trips, I stayed back. Next year, I'd say. When my wife suggested slowing down, I reassured her. Just a few more years. I'm building something for us. At 40, my life looked impressive from the outside. House in a good neighborhood, title on a business card that made people nod respectfully, children in good schools. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't fully alive either. The enthusiasm I used to feel, the curiosity, the hunger for experience had quietly been replaced by maintenance mode. My days became predictable. Wake up, work, solve problems, come home tired. Repeat. And every sacrifice felt justified because it served later. Later we'll travel. Later I'll write that book. Later I'll call my brother and fix that distance between us. Later I'll sit without checking my watch. After 40, something subtle shifted. I stopped asking what I wanted. I started asking what was expected. I told myself this was maturity, but if I'm honest, it was fear. Fear of losing momentum, fear of disappointing people, fear of stepping off the ladder I had already climbed so far. And here's the part that's hard to admit. The more I achieved, the more trapped I felt by what I had achieved. My income required a certain lifestyle. My title required a certain identity. My reputation required consistency. Success became a cage made of gold. I didn't notice the cost because the cost was incremental. A missed recital here, a postponed anniversary trip there, a conversation cut short because an email felt urgent. Nothing dramatic, just erosion. I convinced myself this was temporary, that all responsible adults live like this, that joy is something you earn after decades of effort. but I never defined how much effort was enough. And that's how 52 years pass, not in tragedy, in slow, reasonable compromises. Looking back, I see it clearly now. I wasn't building freedom, I was building obligations. And every year I believed the same promise, just a little longer, then life begins.
The lie wasn't dramatic. It didn't shout. It whispered. Be practical. Be responsible. Be patient. And hidden inside those reasonable words was the real message. Delay your life. For 52 years, I believed that postponing joy was the price of success, and I paid it faithfully. I told myself I was different from people who wasted time. I avoided risks that didn't come with guaranteed returns. I filtered every decision through one question. Will this move me forward? Not forward emotionally, not forward spiritually, forward professionally, forward financially, forward socially. If something didn't advance those areas, it was labeled indulgent, optional, later. The problem with living that way is subtle. You don't feel miserable, you feel productive. And productivity is addictive. You wake up with purpose, you solve problems, you close deals, you collect achievements. People respect you. They admire your discipline. But what they're really admiring is your willingness to sacrifice yourself quietly. At 45, I had more than I ever imagined at 25, yet my internal life felt narrower. Conversations revolved around work. My identity was welded to my performance. If someone had asked me, "Who are you without your career?" I wouldn't have known how to answer. That's when the lie becomes dangerous, because the lie doesn't just steal time, it steals identity. I became the provider, the achiever, the reliable one, the responsible one. But I stopped being the curious one, the spontaneous one, the creative one. And here's the brutal truth. When you abandon parts of yourself long enough, they don't wait forever. They fade. At 52, when my heart forced me into a hospital bed, I thought the fear would be about death. It wasn't. It was emptiness. I realized I had optimized my life for external metrics and neglected internal ones. My bank account had grown. My emotional range had shrunk. And lying there, I asked myself a question that cracked something open. If I survive this, what exactly am I rushing back to? More emails? More meetings? Another 10 years of postponement? The lie had convinced me that someday the workload would lighten. It doesn't. The lie had convinced me that I would finally arrive. You don't arrive, you adapt upward. You make more money, your lifestyle expands. You gain status, expectations rise. You buy comfort, maintenance increases. The goalposts move faster than your awareness. And then something terrifying happens in your 50s or 60s. You realize you don't actually know what fulfills you anymore, because fulfillment was never practiced, it was deferred. I had trained myself to tolerate stress, but not to cultivate joy. I had built endurance, but not presence. And presence is a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it weakens. The biggest consequence of the lie isn't burnout, it's emotional numbness. You stop reacting strongly to sunsets. You stop laughing loudly. You stop dreaming vividly, because dreaming feels inefficient. I remember one specific moment that still embarrasses me. My daughter invited me to a small weekend trip. Nothing extravagant, just 2 days away. I declined because I had a strategic planning session. 2 years later, she stopped inviting me. Not out of anger, out of adjustment. She adapted to my pattern. That's what people do when you consistently choose later. They adjust to your absence. And by the time you realize what you've prioritized, the relationships have recalibrated without you. The lie also creates a quiet arrogance. You think you're sacrificing for others, but often you're sacrificing connection for ego validation.
I told myself I was working for my family, but I was also working for recognition, for identity, for proof that I mattered. It's uncomfortable to admit that, yet necessary, because if you don't examine your motives, the lie remains invisible. Here it is, clearly stated. Life is not something you prepare for, it is something you participate in. Preparation without participation becomes postponement, and postponement becomes regret. At 73, I see young professionals glowing with ambition, repeating my exact sentences. Once this quarter ends, after this promotion, when things stabilize. They say it with conviction, just like I did, and I want to grab them and ask, stabilize for what? To live or to stabilize more? The lie survives because it sounds wise, but wisdom without awareness is just inherited programming. You do not need to quit your job. You do not need to reject ambition. But if ambition consistently outranks aliveness, you are reenacting my mistake. Success is not the villain. Unquestioned success is. If every year looks like disciplined delay, 20 years will disappear quietly. And one day you will look around and realize you mastered achievement, but you postponed life. Don't be me. Ask yourself right now, what have you labeled later that actually belongs in today? Because the lie only ends the moment you refuse to repeat it.
The awakening didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a dramatic vow in a hospital bed. It was quieter than that. It started with discomfort I couldn't ignore anymore. After I recovered, everyone expected me to get back to normal, but normal was the problem. I remember sitting at my desk a few weeks later, staring at my calendar and feeling something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades: resistance. Not laziness, not fear, resistance to wasting more time unconsciously. For the first time, I asked a different question, not what's next, but why? Why am I doing this? Why does this matter? Who am I trying to impress? And the answers were unsettling. A lot of what I was chasing had nothing to do with joy. It had everything to do with validation. So I started making small changes, not reckless ones, intentional ones. I left work earlier once a week. I called my brother without an agenda. I sat with my wife without multitasking. At first, it felt inefficient, almost irresponsible. That's how deeply the lie had wired me. But something unexpected happened. I felt present. Not productive, present. And presence feels different in your body, slower, fuller. Here's what I realized at 53. You don't need a second life. You need to stop living the wrong version of this one. The decade you ignore discomfort is the decade you sacrifice freedom. At 40, you still have energy to pivot. At 50, you start negotiating energy. At 60, you negotiate health. At 70, you negotiate time. I was lucky. I got my wake-up call while I could still respond to it. And the biggest shift wasn't external, it was internal permission. Permission to prioritize meaning over momentum. Permission to define success differently. Permission to live now, not later. That's when life stopped feeling like preparation and started feeling like participation. I'm 73 now, and if there's one thing age gives you, it's clarity without illusion. The lie didn't ruin my life, it diluted it. That's worse. Because dilution is subtle. It doesn't feel like destruction. It feels like postponement, like responsibility, like maturity. Until you wake up and realize you've been living in preparation mode for decades. Here's the truth I wish someone had forced me to confront at 35. The error isn't ambition. The error is believing life starts after ambition is satisfied. It never is. You don't reach a summit where a voice announces, "Congratulations, you may now begin living." Living has to run parallel to building, not after it. So let me ask you something uncomfortable. If nothing changes, if you keep your current pace, priorities, and postponements, where does that lead in 10 years? Who will you have become? And more importantly, what parts of you will have disappeared quietly? Because that's how this works, not with catastrophe, with erosion, one postponed joy at a time. If my words are bothering you right now, that's good. Discomfort is awareness knocking. So don't click away and bury it like I did for 52 years. Tell me in the comments, what is one thing you've been postponing that actually matters? One conversation, one trip, one change, one boundary. Write it down publicly, make it real. And if this message stirred something deeper, there's another story you need to hear. Watch this next. I'm 93. Don't make this mistake after 40. Because at 73, I learned the lie. But at 93, the cost of believing it becomes even clearer. If you don't want to be sitting there decades from now wishing you had listened, stay with me. Subscribe. Time is moving either way. The question is, are you finally moving with it?